Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Safeguarding Access to Clean Drinking Water in Florida. My name is Kara Cook, and I'm the Climate and Health Program Manager for the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. On this webinar, speakers will highlight some of the biggest challenges that impact water supply in communities in Florida, focusing on offshore drilling and rollbacks of environmental protections and how that impacts human health. Speakers will also share examples of how nurses and other health professionals can get involved with advocating for critical access to clean and safe drinking water. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. You can enter a question during or after the presentation by entering it in the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. This webinar is being recorded, and the link will be sent out to those who registered for the webinar. One nursing continuing education will be provided for today's webinar. In the follow-up email that will be sent out, you will receive a link to complete an evaluation and post-test. You must complete the evaluation and post-test to receive nursing continuing education. This webinar is presented in partnership with the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments, the Florida Nurse Practitioner Network, the Miami chapter of the Black Nurses Association, and Florida Clinicians for Climate Action. I encourage you all to check out their websites to learn more about the amazing work they are all doing. And with that, I'm thrilled to introduce our first speaker, Katherine Newton, who is a campaign organizer for Oceana in South Florida. She has been involved in ocean and coastal conservation in South Florida for over 10 years. She has experience in campaign management and grassroots organizing, leading successful campaigns to reduce plastic pollution, protect coastal habitat, and ensure public beach access. Most recently, she served as chair of the Surfrider Foundation Broward County chapter and has been a strong coalition partner in Oceana's work to stop seismic airgun blasting and offshore drilling in the Atlantic. I'll turn it over to you, Katherine.
Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me? Great. My name is Katherine Newton. Thank you everybody for joining this webinar. I am the South Florida campaign organizer for Oceana. And if you are not familiar with Oceana, we are the largest international nonprofit organization solely dedicated to protecting the oceans. And that is our website if you would like to see more information. Oceana does work mostly in federal policy. So we work with illegal fishing and seafood fraud, protecting the North Atlantic right whales, plastic pollution, responsible fishing, climate and energy, which is our offshore drilling campaign, and also banning the sale and trade of shark fins in the United States. And you can find out more about these campaigns on our website. Today, I'm going to be talking about offshore drilling, our offshore drilling campaign, and protecting Florida's coasts. So in order to understand offshore drilling, you need to know who makes the decision, and that would be the Department of the Interior, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, and the President and Congress are also able to limit the areas available for leasing for oil and gas drilling. And the reason why we have this campaign is because nearly all US waters have been proposed for offshore drilling for oil and gas by the current administration. In all the areas that you see in red, those are the areas that have been proposed for drilling, which as you can see is nearly everything. In the yellow, you can see areas where drilling is currently taking place in the Gulf. Next to Florida in the Eastern Gulf, that is the area that is currently under a drilling moratorium because of the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster. That moratorium is set to expire in 2022. So in order to search for oil and gas, that's the first step in oil exploration, we would have to conduct seismic airgun blasting. Seismic airgun blasting, we are opposing. It is extremely destructive to all marine life, not just large dolphins and whales, but down to the smallest species in the ocean. And how seismic airgun blasting works is they tow a large array full of compressed air from a boat, and this compressed air comes out like an explosion underwater every 10 to 12 seconds, all day, every day, sometimes for months at a time. And these explosions are 100,000 times louder than a jet engine. Obviously, our marine life is very sensitive to sound, so this process is very destructive, but it penetrates the ocean floor, and it gives them a reading of the ocean floor to let them know where possible oil and gas deposits might be found. And once they think that they have found possible deposits, it's not 100%. Sometimes it's only 15 to 40% accurate. They would have to drill exploratory wells. So these seismic air guns, like I said, are extremely loud. They occur all day, every day, sometimes for months at a time. And the seismic industry is not required to share data with any competitors, federal or state governments. So this is strictly for searching for oil and gas. Now, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management that I mentioned before has come up with their own estimated seismic impacts, and they are estimating injuries and death to 138,000 whales and dolphins, 13.5 million impacts to marine mammals' vital behavior, disruption of loggerhead sea turtle nesting sites, reduction in spawning rates for forage fish and other commercially important fish species, and impacts to critically endangered North Atlantic right whales. These are all the areas on our Atlantic coast where the seismic airgun blasting would take place. These are the companies that would be allowed to conduct this seismic airgun blasting, and they would be allowed to bring their seismic boats and blast in all different directions, overlapping in these areas. And what you also don't see is that the sound travels outside of these zones up to 2,500 miles outside these zones. So just because the boats are traveling in those areas right down to where you see the central coast of Florida, it doesn't mean that the sound is not going to have impacts further. So like I said before, the seismic interpretation does not tell us exactly what's out there. If it's a 2D seismic, it's correct about 15 to 25% of the time. And if it's a 3D seismic, which is louder and more invasive and more destructive, it will be a 40% chance of finding oil and gas. So to know what's out there, you really do have to drill. So these are all the things that can and do go wrong in offshore drilling. There are platform spills, pipeline leaks, drilling leaks, wellhead leaks, production spills, oil tanker leaks, and there have been, when we drill, we spill. There have been many spills that have happened. There's one in the Gulf of Mexico that I know in 2018, it had been leaking for 14 years. It was caused by a platform that shifted underground because of a Category 3 hurricane. And we all know that hurricanes affect us here in Florida, and that was just a Category 3. These drilling spills affect our seagrass, coral reefs, birds, fish, mammals, mangroves, estuaries, and then obviously has human health impacts as well. So, like I said, there's a drilling moratorium in the Eastern Gulf right now because of Deepwater Horizon. It is set to expire in 2022. This disaster killed 11 people. It spilled over 200 million gallons of oil. It was caused by an exploratory well and a failed blowout preventer. And it's about 10 years since we've had the Deepwater Horizon disaster. So Oceana came up with a report about this disaster, and basically their findings were that we still have impacts felt today in our ecosystems and economies. The drilling is dirty and dangerous even 10 years later. The methods for dealing with a spill and cleaning it up is really no different than they were 10 years ago. And we may never know the full extent of just how much damage the disaster caused. There's still being fish species that are still being found with oil from Deepwater Horizon disaster inside of them. So some of the key findings were that the response to the catastrophe was inadequate, it was incomplete, far too many recommendations were implemented, the regulators and the offshore oil and gas industry remain poorly suited to prevent and deal with a similar scenario today. And also housing markets on the Gulf Coast region experienced a decline in prices between 4% and 8%, and that persisted for at least 5 years afterwards. The BP disaster directly reduced recreational activities, which is we all know is good for our mental health and physical health, but also our economy. So that includes boating, fishing, beach visits. There was a loss in recreation industry of more than $500 million. The fisheries closed and the demand for the Gulf seafood plummeted. People did not trust the seafood that came from the Gulf. Government studies estimated the loss in the seafood industry at nearly $1 billion. So here are some more of the deadly impacts from this disaster. We had over 150 dead dolphins and whales, up to 170,000 dead sea turtles, trillions of larval fish and invertebrates killed, up to 800,000 birds died, and 8.3 million oysters killed. Obviously, there was human health impacts as well. Not only did 11 people die, but a lot of the people that worked on this spill had long-lasting health impacts from cleaning up the oil and from the chemicals and dispersants that were used to deal with this oil spill. Again, there were huge economic impacts to our fishing, our tourism, our recreation, and our real estate. Between 2007 and 2018, there were more than 7,000 oil spills in federal waters at an average of about 2 every day. So spills happen all of the time. Drilling is still very, very dangerous. There were 115 fires and explosions in federal waters on average every year. And there were more than 3,000 injuries and 48 fatalities in total. Unfortunately, the oil and gas industry has not let up on pursuing Florida's coast for offshore drilling. So David Mica, the executive director of the Florida Petroleum Council, which is one of Explore Offshore's backers, said that Florida was largely unaffected. And Jeff Kottkamp from Explore Offshore said the oil from the Deepwater Horizon disaster didn't even reach the shores of Florida. And this is actually a picture from Pensacola Beach. So the oil absolutely reached the coast of Florida. Unfortunately, our administration continues to roll back regulations on offshore drilling. The Trump administration allowed 1,700 exceptions to the well control rule that Obama put in place in 2016 to improve drilling safety as a result of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Again, when we drill, we spill. This is the Taylor Energy oil platform that was leaking 10,000 to 30,000 gallons of oil per day from 2004 to 2018. One of the arguments that we use for not offshore drilling, besides the fact that it impacts our recreation and our health and our seafood, is that it's our economy. So if we're talking about our nation's clean coast economy, there are over 2.6 million jobs, roughly $180 billion in GDP from keeping a clean coast. And if we did this offshore drilling, it would only be for 2 years worth of oil and 1 year worth of gas, which is not worth the risk. Florida's clean coast economy provides approximately 610,000 jobs and roughly $37.4 billion in GDP. So this small amount of oil and gas is not only worth the risk, but it's not a good means to achieve energy independence. And what if the Deepwater Horizon spilled in the Eastern Gulf, where drilling is proposed to take place? So some in Congress want to allow new oil drilling just 50 miles off of Florida's Gulf Coast, where clean beaches and healthy fish stocks support more than 304,000 jobs and $17.5 billion in GDP. And this map shows the scale of the deadly Deepwater Horizon oil spill compared with the eastern Gulf of Mexico, which is now targeted for new drilling. And since we're talking about human health, I make an effort to look up the health impacts of climate change and putting more fossil fuels into the atmosphere, which is what we will be doing if we drill for more oil. And this is from the CDC website, Impacts of Climate Change on Human Health, which you may have already seen this chart. Rising temperatures, more extreme weather, sea levels rising, which we can see here in South Florida already happening, and increase in pollution levels, and greenhouse gases. So we really need to get a hold of this, and we absolutely should not be drilling for more fossil fuels off of especially the Atlantic coast, where no drilling is happening right now. So our recommendations were that President Trump should halt all efforts to expand offshore drilling to new areas. We should direct BOEM to reverse efforts to weaken safety regulations, and we should direct BOEM to deny all pending geological and geophysical seismic permits for oil and gas in the Atlantic Ocean. Congress should enact a moratorium on expanded offshore drilling, and Congress should incentivize investments in clean, renewable energy. Among our opposition, which is what we do here, one of my jobs is to build opposition towards this plan. Down here in Florida, we have over 96 municipalities that have passed resolutions opposing drilling. For the Atlantic plan, we have over 380 municipalities that have passed resolutions. We have all these chambers of commerce, even more now have been added to that list, fishery councils, any group that we can get to write a letter, pass a resolution opposing this plan. And we put all of this information and all of this opposition on a website called stopthedrill.org. If you'd like to take a look, stopthedrill.org has all of our opposition and all of the municipalities in alphabetical order for you to take a look at. If you notice that your chamber of commerce or your organization or your city has not passed a resolution, please ask them to do so. I can give you a blank template that makes it very easy. We've had some victories along the way here with this campaign. The U.S. House of Representatives passed H.R. 1941 and H.R. 205, which were permanent moratoriums on drilling. And that would be moratoriums in the Eastern Gulf and the Atlantic and the Pacific. So these two bills passed on September 11th, 2019. There has been no action on these bills yet. However, the House of Representatives also, we had a victory in their Department of the Interior spending bill that they would be blocking new offshore drilling in the spending bill. Again, we need action in the Senate. So there are also business organizations that business owners can join if they want to oppose this plan. On the Atlantic side, we have the Business Alliance for Protecting the Atlantic Coast. And on the Gulf side of Florida, we have the Gulf Coast Business Coalition. This is really important because the business voice is obviously is weighted heavily in Congress. And we also have members of these organizations speaking for their members when we lobby our elected officials. Here are some other things that people can do to help oppose this dangerous and dirty plan. We have a petition on our site. It's oceana.org/actnow. Anybody from any state can sign this petition, so please share that with your friends, family, and coworkers. Again, you can ask your Chamber of Commerce or city to pass resolutions opposing drilling. You can give Senators Rubio and Scott a call. Those are their phone numbers right there, and ask them to oppose offshore drilling. You can write an opinion piece for your local newspaper stressing your concern about our health, our environment, our climate, and this offshore drilling plan. You can sign up for our email list and action alerts. We are on social media. We have Oceana and Oceana in Florida on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So please follow Oceana and Oceana in Florida. And again, please sign that petition. And you might ask, does it make a difference? Do I have to make a donation? You do not have to make a donation to sign this letter to Congress. It will go directly through to them, depending on your address. It will know where to send it. And it does make a difference, because if we all did it and we all made that phone call, they would know that it matters to us. And if you need to reach out with me in the future, my name is Katherine Newton. I am the South Florida campaign organizer for Oceana. That is my email. Do not hesitate to get in touch with me. And as nurses and health professionals, we can always use your support in our campaign. So please let me know if you would like to help. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katherine, for that amazing presentation, really emphasizing the harms of offshore drilling, not only to human and ocean health, but to our economies. So thank you so much for that. And just a reminder to please, if you have questions for Katherine, we're going to take them at the end of the presentation. So please enter them in the chat box, and we will get to your questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our second speaker, Jenna Stevens. Jenna is the State Director for Environment Florida. Jenna organizes campaigns to protect Florida's environment from polluters and to defend environmental protections in the state. So I'll turn it over to you, Jenna.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Jenna Stevens, and I am the State Director for Environment Florida and Environment Florida Research and Policy Center. We are a statewide environmental advocacy group that we stand for clean air, clean water, open spaces here in Florida. But we're also the state affiliate of Environment America. So I get to spend a lot of my time actually working on federal environmental issues as well as state ones. So I'm really excited today to talk to you all about how some of the things that are going on at the federal level right now, specifically EPA rollbacks to existing clean water protections, can have an impact here in Florida and what it means for our state. So I'm going to start off with talking a little bit about the different impacts we're already experiencing here in Florida. And the truth is, we're just not protecting our waters the way that we should. Many of Florida's streams, rivers, and coastal waters are so polluted that we can't swim in them, fish from them, or drink from them. From fertilizer runoff to red tide to toxic blue-green algal outbreaks, and even leaky septic systems, Floridians are already experiencing the devastation that occurs when we don't invest in protecting clean water. And I listed some examples here. Over the last several years, we've had red tide outbreaks, blue-green algal outbreaks. We experience plastic pollution in our waterways, frequent sewage spills, as well as toxic runoff, and much more. And decades ago, some people thought that polluted rivers, streams, and coasts were the price we had to pay for progress. And in that time, we were having rivers catch on fire on the regular. Luckily, that's not the world we have to live in anymore, nor is it the future that the children deserve. Unfortunately, though, federal environmental cops are often taken off the clean water beat, which means companies dump more waste into our waterways as well as other polluters. We're experiencing large dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico and other waterways, as grants to state and regional clean water cleanup and restoration programs are slashed. And more havoc is wreaked in coastal communities as more algal breaks and sewage overflows occur. And algal outbreaks, for those who aren't aware, it's a really complicated issue to talk about what causes them. But what we can say is that excessive nitrogen and phosphorus pollution exacerbate the conditions that create these large toxic algal blooms. And that excessive nitrogen and phosphorus pollution often comes from agricultural runoff, but also urban runoff and sewage in some places as well. In addition to harming wildlife and water quality, some algal outbreaks contain toxins that threaten human health, as well as environmental health. And each year, 3.5 million Americans get sick after swimming, boating, fishing, or coming in contact with water contaminated by sewage. And Florida is no exception. From Pensacola to Sarasota to Miami, we're seeing millions of gallons of sewage overflows and stormwater runoff pollute our waterways, close beaches, and or make people sick. Inadequately treated human sewage contains harmful bacteria that can cause salmonella, hepatitis, dysentery, and many other infectious diseases. Additionally, these sewage spills can lead to greater risk of widespread algal outbreaks that harm our health or wildlife, as well as our coastal economies. So a little bit more about algal blooms. Like I said, the past few years, we've experienced larger and more pervasive algal outbreaks. Specifically in 2018, we saw a convergence of blue-green algal outbreaks and red tide algal outbreaks at the same time. Blue-green algae specifically has large health impacts because of the toxic nature of that algae. However, red tide, especially with people with pre-diagnosed respiratory illnesses, red tide blooms can exacerbate those problems, especially in patients with asthma. Whereas with blue-green algae, the impacts are pretty wide-ranging. People can experience everything from, rashes to vomiting to long-term impacts like in long-term large exposure to blue-green toxic algae can mean liver impacts as well as neurological impacts in the long run, which is particularly frightening. Additionally, the animals that ingest these toxic algal blooms can pass that up the food chain to humans as well. So it puts the food we eat at risk, and it puts our health at risk. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about sewage spills. So many of you might have heard about the different sewage spills we've been experiencing around the state. Recently, there was thousands of gallons of raw sewage spilled into Sarasota Bay. We've experienced some in Hillsborough County. Fort Lauderdale has been a hotspot of sewage spills over the last year. Just this winter, there was over 200 million gallons of sewage spilled in the Fort Lauderdale area into our waterways. And this problem comes from aging infrastructure, a lack of funding for updates and repairs, and at the federal level, a severe lack of funding, where proposed budgets have called for basically decimating the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which provides the funding needed to repair this infrastructure. And like I said, each year, 3.5 million Americans can get sick after swimming in waters that are contaminated by sewage. Just a couple of weeks ago, we released a new report called Safe for Swimming that detailed what the situation is on Florida beaches and how contaminated they are by sewage. And unfortunately, what we found is that all too often, the beaches here in Florida are plagued with this kind of pollution. And specifically, we found that 187 out of 261 beach sites tested in Florida had enough pollution to put swimmers at risk of getting sick at least one day last year. And in Pasco County, the average beach was potentially unsafe for swimming on 33% of the days that sampling took place, a higher percentage than any other county in the state. And this is a real problem because in Florida, we're known for our beautiful waterways, and our guests, our visitors, and our residents alike shouldn't have to go to the beach wondering if it's actually safe for them to swim in. They shouldn't have to be worried about getting sick because they went out on the boat for the weekend. Luckily, these are really solvable problems. Simply by funding the needed infrastructure to make sure that we're not having spills, we can help alleviate a huge amount of this problem. Additionally, our waterways are plagued by plastic pollution at the moment. More trash than we can expect that at the current rate of plastic consumption, we'll have more trash than fish pound for pound by the year 2050, and that 100% of turtle species were found to have plastic in their stomachs. And microplastics are a persistent problem in our waterways. Again, ingesting plastic is not good for human health, nor is it good for the health of our animals. And it's something that we need to address. So those are a few of the problems. And now I want to talk about what's going on at the federal level and what that means for Florida. Luckily, there's a few, before we dive into the EPA rollbacks, there are actually a few good things that are happening. Specifically, just a few weeks ago, the US House of Representatives passed an EPA funding package that includes billions of additional money for emergency water infrastructure projects that'll allow us to tackle the issue of aging stormwater and sewage water treatment facilities so that we're not having these constant and disgusting sewage spills into our waterways around the state. Additionally, there was a permanent reauthorization and permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. The LWCF helps to preserve more of our wild places and provide open spaces for both recreational purposes and just to enjoy nature around the country. And the more places that we have, we've seen that the more places that we have protected and preserved, the more likely we are to have cleaner waterways in the surrounding areas. And then additionally, we have the Clean Water for All Act, which I will get into a little bit later on. So let's talk about the bad, what's happening with the EPA rollbacks. And what we're seeing is that, unfortunately, the Trump administration has had an environmental agenda that has been opposed to basic clean water science. We've seen rollbacks of about 100 different environmental protections over the last 3.5 years under this administration, including many to existing clean water protections. One of the most egregious, and the first one that I'll talk about, is the rollback of the 2015 Clean Water Rule, which was finalized in April amidst the pandemic. The replacement rule is much weaker. It's not just expected anymore, it is much weaker. It removes protections from millions of miles of streams and for more than half of our nation's remaining wetlands. And unfortunately, because of overdevelopment in the, especially in the 1950s, we've seen the destruction of nearly half of the nation's wetlands already, and this threatens half of the remaining wetlands we have. And wetlands are so essential to Florida's water quality health because they help to filter out pollutants before they reach major bodies of water. Additionally, they help to provide a place for water to go and be stored in the face of storms. So they help to reduce flooding in our communities across the state when we are faced by major storm events. Many of the streams that flood, additionally, so background, 1.8 million Floridians rely on waters protected by the Clean Water Rule, the 2015 Clean Water Rule, for drinking water. So not only does this, jeopardize our wetlands, millions of miles of streams across the country, but it also jeopardizes access to clean drinking water, which we know is so essential to the health of our communities and just to everyone's lives. So that is the rollback of the 2015 Clean Water Rule. Additionally, another attack that has happened on the Clean Water Act is the rollback of Section 401 of the Clean Water Act. And this was finalized again amidst the pandemic in June of 2020. And what the Section 401 does is it authorizes states and tribes to review the impacts of many different types of federally licensed projects on waterways within their borders and to limit or stop unacceptable projects. So if the federal government wants to build a pipeline in our state or on a tribal land, it would have to go through 401 review a lot of the times if it's going to impact our waterways. However, what this rollback does is it impedes states' abilities to protect their own waterways from these projects and makes it more difficult for states and tribes to block those damaging projects, whether it be a pipeline or a new mine or another type of project that could really damage the health of our waterways and the health of our communities. Some of these projects have the potential to significantly degrade water quality, for example, by cutting trenches through hundreds of waterways, damming major rivers, or destroying acres of wetlands. And preventing these projects has gotten a lot harder under this administration, unfortunately. So the new policy for 401 after this rollback changed has limited the amount of time that states and tribes can oppose these projects, making it much more difficult to do what is necessary to protect their state and tribal waters. And then here's a few more. So the ugly, some more EPA rollbacks. So the EPA has proposed a new coal ash rule, and this is still in progress. And this delays closure and cleanup for coal ash ponds. Coal ash ponds are a huge threat to human health because coal ash is extremely toxic. Many coal ash ponds are not lined across the United States and are close to major waterways or are able to be infiltrating groundwater sources. So those unlined ponds can seep into our groundwater, or if there is a storm in a waterway close by, that coal ash can just get into our waterways, making the surrounding communities sick and limiting the amount of fresh, clean water that those communities have access to. Additionally, the EPA has proposed effluent limitation guides, which means that power plants, which account for 30% of discharges to toxic discharges to our waterways, have an easier time putting that toxic discharge into our waterways now. It just basically makes it more simple for them to do what is already really bad. Coal waste is dangerous to both human health and our environment, and those are the two things that EPA is tasked to protect. So we need to keep this toxic waste out of our waterway. And then with the effluent limitation guidelines rollback, it allows for significant threats to our rivers, lakes, and streams to continue. According to the EPA's own data, like I said, 30% of those toxic discharges across the country are coming from these power plants. And some of those toxic discharges include arsenic, lead, mercury, and selenium, a cancer-causing substance. Yet this proposal would allow these facilities to continue dumping more toxic substances into our waterways. So those are, and then the third thing on this slide, so there's potential for the EPA to update sewage blending rules. As of now, this proposal is on hold. They planned on releasing the new sewage blending rule in the late spring, but with the pandemic, the EPA has decided to hold off on releasing that rule simply because of the worry that sewage can have remnants of COVID in it and be a threat to human health in that way. But what this potential blending rule would do would legalize allowing sewage spills to happen. So right now, those sewage spills that are occurring in Florida are completely illegal, and this potential rule that the EPA is considering would make it legal. So again, why the Clean Water Act is so important. Why are all these pieces of legislation important to Florida beyond what has already been stated? The Clean Water Act specifically has a provision that allows the average American to sue companies that are illegally polluting their waterways. And protecting that right for Americans to protect their own waters is completely important to the health of our communities and the health of our waterways in the long term. We put as an example a picture of our lawsuit against Pilgrim's Pride, which is a chicken processing plant. They have a plant up on the Suwannee River, and we're self-reporting that they were breaking the Clean Water Act law. And we won that lawsuit on behalf of our members. But unfortunately, because of these rollbacks, these kinds of lawsuits will just get harder, and holding polluters accountable will get more difficult. So what can we do, and what can y'all do? So the things that need to be done are repair and update our aging stormwater and sewage treatment infrastructure, strengthen and enforce existing federal clean water legislation instead of rolling it back or ignoring it completely, protect and provide funding for restoration of Florida's wetlands and waterways, hold polluting industries accountable when they break existing laws, ban fracking in Florida. So these are just a few of the many things that need to be done in order to protect Florida's waterways and the health of our communities. Additionally, we need to actually take on the industries that are polluting itself and limit agricultural runoff as well. And then, so what can be done right at this moment is that, like I said, the House just passed that really great EPA funding package that has billions of dollars of funding for updating our aging stormwater and sewage treatment infrastructure that now sits with the Senate. So urging Senators Rubio and Senator Scott to take on this really important issue and do what they can to protect the health of our waterways and our communities. Is something that can be done right now. And then additionally, like I said, there's the Clean Water for All Act. So the Clean Water for All Act would essentially halt the implementation of the rollback of the Clean Water Rule. So the new rule that the Trump administration has proposed is called the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, but what the environmental community calls the Dirty Water Rule. And the Clean Water for All Act would halt the implementation of that. So asking our elected officials in the House of Representatives to co-sponsor that piece of legislation and make sure that it passes is essential to protecting Florida's health and the health of our communities. And I think that's everything. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for that comprehensive overview of, how the Clean Water Act and national regulations should be in place to protect the state and those in the state, but how they're being in your presentation on how those are being threatened and impacted. Just real quick before we hop into the Q&A, I just want to let you all know that the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments right now is doing a selfie video campaign. And what that means is we're collecting selfie videos that nurses are filming themselves, talking about how water pollution impacts the health of their patients, communities, and or personally or their family's health, and also what they're doing to take action to protect clean water. The reason we're doing this is because personal stories can be so compelling and really help move others to action. So it helps inspires other nurses to take action to protect clean water. And that's really the goal of this campaign. And we're also aiming to get our elected officials to take action to protect our drinking water sources. So we're just asking nurses to create a short 2-minute selfie video about why clean water is important to health and how they're taking action. We have messaging and filming guidance to help you craft a great video. It doesn't need to be high tech. It doesn't need to take you long. Really just kind of doing a quick selfie video, sharing your story can be very inspirational. So if you're interested, please reach out to me. I'm going to pop my email in the chat box, and I'm happy to help answer any questions with that. So we will move on to the Q&A, and we do have some questions here in the chat. So I'm just going to start real quickly here with the first one. If the Trump administration, and Katherine, this is directed towards you, if the Trump administration gets their way for this offshore drilling plan, how soon could it happen?
Thank you for that question. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that once the boats and companies make the announcement that they have the permits, they can begin blasting within 30 days. There are things called IHAs, which are incidental harm authorizations, which is kind of exactly like what it sounds like. The seismic companies have been given permission to harm a certain number of marine mammals, dolphins, whales, sea turtles, and now that they have those IHAs, they could get the seismic and blasting permits. Again, once they announce them, I believe they have 30 days before they can put the boats in and start blasting. So not very much time at all. And somebody also asked the seismic sound. Does the seismic cause coastal erosion? Not necessarily the sound. However, if we do drill for oil and explore for oil, the spills and the cleanup efforts and the chemicals involved in it can certainly cause erosion because it affects the mangroves, the seagrass, and the marshes that help hold coastal areas in place. So when you think about, the disasters that occur when we kill off those areas, those important environmentally protected areas, that can certainly cause erosion and not protect us during storms. So all of that information is at stopthedrill.org if you would like to go ahead and look. Thank you.
Thank you, Katherine. In this next, it's more a comment, but perhaps Jenna, you might have some feedback or some more information to share. But it was mentioning about in the northern Biscayne Bay, there was a large fish kill last week due to a lack of oxygen in some waterways being covered with harmful algal blooms. And I'm not sure if, Jenna, you have any response to that from, in the terms of your work in health and environmental impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. The fish kills in the Miami area have been completely devastating. The videos of the stingrays basically suffocating because of the low dissolved oxygen levels in the water is really devastating. And to think about the potential health impacts of these kinds of occurrences on, the people in our communities is also really concerning. But yeah, I mean, the situation in Biscayne Bay has been a long time coming, unfortunately. I know the city of Miami has been working to take steps over the last few years because they did see this coming with a recent fertilizer ordinance so that less fertilizer runoff is coming into the bay. But we've seen huge sewage spills in this area over the last several years. And the level of nutrient pollution in the bay is really dangerous for all of our wildlife and for our coastal and waterway ecosystems. So unfortunately, I mean, this was, not a totally unexpected occurrence. The nutrient pollution has been high there for a really long time.
Thank you, Jenna. And I'm not sure who might want to take this question, so I'll open it up to both of you. I noticed a lot of seaweed or turtle grass washing up on our shores. Is this normal or is this a sign of unhealthy water?
I can take that. The short answer is yes, potentially. It is a sign of an unhealthy waterway. Starting in the 1950s, we saw huge seagrass die-offs in Tampa Bay specifically, caused by coal ash, sewage spills, and construction, just runoff from construction in the Tampa Bay area. We had a huge population boom in the 1950s when air conditioning became more prevalent in the state and everyone wanted to live on the water. But as a result, we saw our sewage infrastructure similarly today being overwhelmed and spilling on the regular into the bay, as well as we had really not great rules around energy production, and we had huge amounts of coal ash spilling into the bay as well as just construction supplies going into the bay. And all of that created a situation where the seagrass was dying off in the bay, and as a result, we were having algal outbreaks, fish kills, and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, a lot of the time seagrass can be a really good indicator. The health of our seagrass is a really great indicator of the health of the ecosystem there, whether it's a freshwater and it's, freshwater grasses or it's out in the bay and we have those seagrasses. Both of those can be great indicators of whether the water body itself is healthy.
Thank you, Jenna, for that explanation. I have a question here for Katherine regarding, you mentioned some examples of how, localities or cities can enact moratoriums on offshore drilling. Is there anything that Florida, in particular at a state level, are they doing anything to protect the state against the threat of offshore drilling?
Sure. So actually, those moratoriums in local municipalities, they're not actually, they're not legal moratoriums. So they are resolutions. So a local municipality can pass a resolution, which is basically their official position about something. And it's, not legally binding, but it's just how they feel about something. So basically, it shows our governor, our members of Congress, and everybody else just how strongly we feel about something. So obviously, the more we have, the better. I mean, imagine if we got every single coastal city to pass a resolution opposing drilling. So again, look on stopthedrill.org. If your city is not on there, please ask them to pass a resolution, and I can give you a blank template. As far as our state, our governor has said that he is opposed, and the state of Florida did pass. They voted on our it was called Amendment 9. They voted to ban offshore drilling in state waters. And I believe that passed with something like 70% of Florida voting to ban drilling. However, that's only in state waters. So that was only 9 miles in the Gulf and 3 miles in the Atlantic, which isn't very far. So I'm really glad you asked that question, because I often hear a lot of Floridians say, well, didn't we already ban drilling? I know I voted for that already. So again, that's only 3 miles in the Atlantic and 9 miles in the Gulf. That's state waters. It does not offer us very much protection at all. And it doesn't offer us any protection from the seismic air gun blasting, because as we know, that sound travels up to 2,500 miles. So we really need to ask our members of Congress to oppose this, and make sure that we're building as much opposition that we can.
Thank you, Catherine. We also have a question regarding nuclear generators along the coast. Is there harms to ocean health and human health as a result of these coastal nuclear generators?
Yes, absolutely. They can. I think a really great example of the damage that nuclear generators in Florida can have is the Turkey Point facility in South Florida. The Turkey Point nuclear facility is actually operating between 2 national parks, using more water a day than most of the surrounding area combined. And they're currently legally allowed to discharge this water that is partially polluted into the national park, which is absolutely bonkers that is even something that is allowed. What we're seeing is from this project is that there's saltwater intrusion happening. So there's seepage of nutrient pollution and salt into the surrounding waterways. And it's actually discharging into the Everglades, which is really devastating, considering how hard as a state we've worked to clean up that waterway. So yes, nuclear generators in Florida have absolutely the potential to have serious impacts to our waters.
Thank you for providing that explanation, Jenna. I have another question for Catherine regarding offshore drilling. So you mentioned that the exploration for sites of offshore drilling can cause harm to wetlands or other areas that are actually protected during hurricanes or other disasters. Has any studies shown a connection between the exploratory phase or actually drilling, and any link between disasters becoming worse because of that drilling?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question correctly, but as far as exploration, I mean, if you look at the Deepwater Horizon disaster, that was an exploratory well. And that spill caused massive devastation to our coastlines, our marshes, and again, still long-lasting effects even today. There are certain areas where it would cause probably more damage to go in and try to help the area versus leaving it alone. So there I mean, I spoke with a scientist who says he even finds remnants of the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster in the ovaries of fish still in the Gulf. So there are long lasting effects, especially the deep water Gulf animals. So, even the exploration phase can be very, very destructive and damaging and have long lasting effects. It's 10 years after Deepwater Horizon disaster, and we're still seeing effects today.
Great. Thank you, Katherine. We have just a few minutes left, and so I want to give both of you time just to provide any closing remarks. I know, Katherine, you've popped in the website for stopthedrill.org with lots of great resources there in areas for action. But if perhaps we'll start with Jenna, if you just want to provide some closing remarks, and then Katherine, if you want to provide some as well.
I just want to say thank you again so much for allowing me to come speak to y'all today about the clean water impacts that some of the EPA rollbacks are having on Florida, on our waterways, and on the health of our communities. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. Again, I would just reiterate the importance of letting our elected officials know where you stand on these issues. There's some really important pieces of legislation making their way through Congress right at this moment that can ensure cleaner waterways for Florida. So calling your representatives and letting them know that you support the Clean Water for All Act and that you support increased funding for stormwater and sewage water infrastructure repairs is really essential. Thank you again.
So my advice and ask would be that the ANHE and the Miami Black Nurses Association, you ask your organizations to write a letter or pass a resolution opposing this federal proposed offshore drilling plan because of your concern, for the environment, for our health, and for our climate. And also, as an individual, you can write an opinion piece to your local paper as a healthcare professional, stating your concerns, asking Senators Rubio and Scott to do something to oppose drilling, to reverse this plan. It doesn't need to be done. It shouldn't be done. And, if you want any more tips on how you can help, please let me know. I put the letter to Congress that we would love for you to sign in the chat, oceana.org/actnow. And, we can always use your assistance in our campaigns. Thank you so much for having us.
And thank you to you both for speaking with us today and sharing your time and expertise with us. And I just want to do another reminder about the evaluation and post-test. I will be sending out the link to the recording and link to the evaluation form later today. So if you would like to receive nursing continuing education, you need to complete the evaluation and the post-test that is included in that email. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to our speakers.
Thank you so much.